Hello, welcome. Whether it's your first time or you're returning, my name is Nick Haynes, and I work and specialize as a relationship counselor and couples counselor. I use a form called emotionally focused couples therapy. I also have a background having trained in family mediation and dispute resolution, and I studied a form of language interpretation that we call sociolinguistics, which studies basically what it is we say to each other and what we mean by it. Today, I would like to talk about one particular topic that I think is vital and important for us all to be aware of and to understand, and that is that it would immensely benefit us, in my experience and opinion, to be encouraged and be able to talk much more in certain situations about our emotions, in particular our vulnerable emotions, like sadness or versions of fear or shame. Shame's not easy to talk about, but not just our emotions, but specifically our moment to moment experience of feeling relationally connected with each other and what's going on the inside in our minds about that. Now, why am I saying this? Well, basically, I've always been interested in sort of thinking about the human race. And as you're aware from where I started, the work that I do is specifically working actually with couples, romantic couples, but actually may be surprised or not surprised to hear from me that what helps and heals and repairs couple relationships, romantic relationships, actually is the very same thing that repairs any type of relationship, whether you bump into a stranger and you're both upset and shocked by it, and there are some words exchanged, or you're just talking with your work colleagues, or talking with family members, or with your children. It doesn't have to be that it's explicit to couple relationships, what it is I'm talking about. What heals couple relationships does indeed can heal and create good communication in all relationships. So, what is it that does that? Well, you may not be surprised from where I've started to hear that over a period of time in couples counseling, when I, the couples counselor, are able to assist and encourage and basically make the environment safe for the couple to talk to each other individually and collectively. I get them to sort of face each other and talk a bit more about their emotional experience, that they begin to start experiencing a different response from their partner, one that's much more benign and encouraging, when I can help them talk more about their feelings. So that really is just an example of why I'm saying that that's what we need to talk about, because the same effect, you don't have to be in a romantic relationship with somebody, but the same effect of talking in a vulnerable way with any other human being encourages them to feel that the situation is safer for them to reciprocate and reflect back something that they might be normally they wouldn't want to admit or reveal, and talk indeed about their feelings in relation in a way in which the other person sort of feels listened to and heard and wants to be and finds himself being more empathic towards the other person. And what happens in all relationships, including couple relationships, where we all get bogged down, is when we rely on what I would say is second nature, it's automatic, and we're encouraged to sort of do it explicitly and implicitly, which is to explain what's going on inside us and talk about our views and opinions about the situation, about the other person, about ourselves and so on, without necessarily revealing what it is that we feel emotionally and relationally vulnerable about. So if I'm in a relationship with somebody and, I've experienced that we keep bumping into each other, and every time we try and talk about it, we have an argument, and so on and so forth. And I've used all the available ideas and tools to try and, feel that I'm heard and listen to the other person and make it okay, and they're all exhausted and we're still having the problem, then I'm probably going to feel helpless and discouraged amongst other things. So what it is that affects a change in that pattern of getting stuck and spiraling down into a hole that neither person can get out is to be able to start talking about in ways that you may never have spoken about to your partner or another human being, and they may never have spoken in the same way to you. So what's this got to do with us all, and why would this be good for the human race? Well, as I've said, I've given you examples from my practice with couples, but as I said earlier, it actually the mechanism, the tool of speaking more about our vulnerable feelings in a way that isn't criticize the other person, actually brings about a much more open and a better atmosphere for us listening to each other and beginning to acknowledge and respect why that person might be behaving in the way that they are, and through talking with each other about it, it creates the possibility for connection and acknowledgement and validation and being entitled to what it is that you think and you feel. Because when we listen with empathy, we don't have to agree with the view of the other person, but that we are choosing to respect and entitle them to have their view without trying to make them wrong. So in other videos, I'm going to talk more specifically about specific language and specific examples. But I now want to move in the last part of this shortish video to talk about some actual examples in society in which it would have immeasurably and will immeasurably help us all to talk about our feelings and the sense of connection or disconnection with each other. So I'd like to start first of all with the Brexit debate and situation. So we were there, what was it, around the back end of between 2015 and 2019, I think, from memory. We had this decision as to whether we stayed in the EU or whether we took back our independence and autonomy. And what we know is that we ended up, there were more people that chose to do that. And so Brexit took place. However, what I want to refer to is that I heard very, very little of people, if anything, really talking to any great degree about their more vulnerable emotions, being scared or apprehensive or anxious or sad, or, if shame was something that were relevant to what they were feeling at the time. They didn't talk about that, and they didn't talk specifically, or we all didn't talk about phrases and words to do with, emotional and relational connection. So things like lonely or alone or isolated or not connected with, or not feeling appreciated, but in ways in which other people would prepare to listen. We didn't do this. And the reason why, in my view, we don't do it is because our society doesn't prepare us to do and talk like that. As a result of it, we're a species that is stuck in war and conflict. And often when we talk to each other and we have different views, we get into a form of polarization. So if we talk to each other rather than labeling the opposite camp in ways that they didn't appreciate, but we decided was the right thing to do. So sometimes people who wanted Brexit were called xenophobic, which means a fear of foreigners, or worse, they were called racist, when those labels really didn't appreciate. They weren't actually necessarily accurate, but they didn't appreciate as to the feelings and reasons why people wanted Brexit. Likewise, those who were in Brexit sometimes labelled and gave names or called people who wanted to stay in the EU, who would have had very good emotional and relational reasons for doing so, they labelled them as well. And so we created this sort of increasing polarization, which is what we all tend to do. So that was Brexit. The next big thing happened hard on its heels was the pandemic. That was a very scary thing, kind of unknown thing that we'd not experienced before. And prior to the pandemic, we agreed and applied certain values and ways of behaving in association with talking about stuff. So, for instance, in the area of our health, it was established on all sides that it was quite appropriate to discuss or explore as to whether particular therapeutic or medicinal modalities, you were quite natural and normal to be able to ask questions about them. That's in fact part of the scientific method. And we also, it was intrinsic that there were ethics associated with offering medical procedures or aspects of medicine, vaccines, and drugs, and so on, for the patient to be fully informed. It's called informed consent, as to what the substance that the doctor was recommending was. That was natural and normal, and it was quite normal also for you to freely choose to take it or not. Now, what happened with the pandemic was, not surprisingly, there was a lot of confusion and there was a lot of fear right through society, not only on an individual or a family level, but that fear was reflected in institutions, including politicians, the government, and all the main institutions, mainstream media, and the medical community. And what happened tragically was that as we just talked about the nuts and the bolts, and were encouraged to take this jab, and so on and so forth, there was no discussion, no necessary and helpful discussion about the feelings and emotions people had about it, who may have looked differently as to whether they wanted the jab or they would just ask normal questions about it. What happened was that they were shut down and they were censored, which was utterly inappropriate in terms of the values and ethics that our society had previously run on. And nobody really questioned this. But my main point was that people didn't talk about their fear. They didn't talk about, well, if I do maybe think that's a bit funny, I'm really worried that people will shame me. And so I'd rather go along, with the idea that it must be okay if the doctors and the majority of doctors and government and so on and so forth are saying it was. And nobody really stood up and said it's bang wrong that people are censored and shut down. That's not the right thing. So again, you had this polarization, and then people began to call others and label them and call them names like anti-vaxxers and so on and so forth. So that would have been vital, that we should have talked about our emotions and feelings then. And we would have had a much better cooperative response to it. And we would have been able to talk about things we needed to. Final area, though that's not a new area, but one that's come up quite recently, is the idea of, and I'll do probably a separate video on this, I've done something on it in the past, what I would call ideological caring. And this is really to do with immigration and obviously aspects of the Israeli Gaza situation, in which people on both sides had lots of understandable emotional feelings, and they were very affected in their sense of connection with groups and nations and individuals. But of course, what we tend to do again is talk about it in terms of views, opinions, and what's right and wrong, which are all important things. We never really talked with each other, we talked at each other. And the other area, in terms of the area that's referred to as woke, is that we had these nice labels where people were trying to get others to take on a view as to the closed-mindedness of the past generations, and white people were called, what was it, fragile, and there was another expression that I can't quite remember as I'm trying to recall about it. Basically a prejudice and so on. Again, the people that were advocating caring about groups that, were perhaps censored or, weren't, were whatever the word is, against. They spoke about it in terms of you should think this way and so on and so forth. And again, never talk about our emotions and feelings on both sides. And this is currently been happening with the immigration debate. It's natural and normal, I would say, for us all, because it causes lots of thoughts and feelings. And when, we naturally invite other people into our country and they need to feel safe and we need to feel safe. And so it will be natural and normal to talk about how it might, be affecting our feelings or our sense of connection or our sense of security about our culture, or for them, to be comfortable and safe about what it is that they're bringing and contributing to the society. And again, we fall into the trap and it causes polarization, which can lead to conflict and tension and unfortunately violence. When we keep presenting this as some kind of ideological way that we should all be thinking about it, and we don't talk about our emotions and our sense of connection or disconnection about it, which would be the very helpful thing to do and would change and upgrade our whole sense of community and our ability to talk about these difficult things. So hopefully you've got the gist of what this session is about, which is, I think it's going to be very helpful for us to gradually learn much more about when it's helpful. We don't always have to be talking about it. Just explaining the nuts and the bolts is sometimes all that's relevant to do. But when there are feelings, then it's helpful for us to recognize and to be able to talk about them in a way that helps both people or all groups involved to feel respected, cared about, loved, acknowledged, entitled to what they believe, and to basically feel, as a result, connected with each other. So much more emotions and much more talking about feelings of connection or disconnection. And in other videos, I will talk much more specifically about words and phrases and how to talk about that. But we come to the end of this video. Thank you very much for listening. Please press the subscribe button and the notification bell. And please tell anybody that you think would appreciate what it is that I'm doing on this channel, about me and about the channel. And hopefully look forward to seeing you again. Thanks for coming. Bye-bye for now.